how to address people in formal and informal settings. We're going to look at the English-speaking world, in particular America and the UK, and then we're going to compare it to our world, the Malaysian context, because you're going to see a few differences, and you can compare for yourself. So I want to give a shout out to my friends who have helped me in my research to compare, what's the norm in the UK and what's the norm here in Malaysia. So I'm going to give a shout out to Miss Shad from Manchester for helping me out, and Aisha, Sheila Zul, Dr. Shafawati, Miss G, Madam Halimah Lime. All right, so thank you so much for helping me. Now, firstly, when we talk about addressing people, I'm talking about giving them titles or referring to honorifics. So the word is honorifics. What I mean by honorifics is the same thing as what I mean by titles. So honorifics, this is how you spell it. Honorifics. Honorifics. Same thing as titles. So people might say honorifics or titles, same thing. Okay, now let's give you another definition. Surname. Surname is the same thing as last name or family name. Now, a family name is shared by all members of the family. And so in Western culture, especially I'm talking about the English-speaking world, the family name appears at the end of the first name. So if your name is Elizabeth, your family name would be, say, for example, Wakefield. So Elizabeth Wakefield. Wakefield is not her father's name. Her father's name might be Ned Wakefield. So the name Wakefield is passed down to the next generation. Now, for married women, she may take her husband's surname or family name. That means that her husband's surname is then passed down to her children, to their children. But if she's not married, then she would maintain the name Wakefield. This is in Western culture, especially the English-speaking world. Okay. Now, as I've said, it's a name that's shared by all her family members. That means her mum, her sister, her brother, her siblings, her grandparents on her father's side would have the name Wakefield. So that's something interesting. So I would like for you to remember that. So surname is the same thing as last name and family name. Now, male, when we talk about giving people a title, we have Mr., M-I-S-T-R, and this is normally shortened or abbreviated to Mr., just M-R, or even Sir. So let me explain. Now, in a formal setting, it would be Mr. plus the surname. Remember, I talked about surname, the family name. So if his full name is Sherlock Holmes, in a formal setting, he would be called Mr. Holmes, Holmes being his surname. His full name is Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Now, if we do not know his name, we can just simply call him Sir. So use Sir if we do not know his name. That would be the polite form to do so, okay? Now, what about women, female? So for female, we have Miss, M-I-S-S, we have M-S, M-S, and then we have Mrs., okay? So let me say that again. We have Miss, M-I-S-S, and then we have M-S, which is pronounced Ms., and the third one is Mrs. So let me break it down to you. For unmarried women, she would be called Miss and her surname. So let's go back to the example of Elizabeth Wakefield. So let's say Elizabeth is unmarried, we'd call her Miss Wakefield. Now, in a business setting, in a modern setting, it doesn't matter. I mean, you're married or not, it's not that important. So you can call her Ms., right? That is pronounced as Ms. So it sounds like you spell it like this, M-I-Z, okay? So Ms. instead of Miss. Ms., it would be Ms. Wakefield, okay? That's because we don't know if she's married or not, and it doesn't really matter. Now, if we know that she's married, it would be Mrs. So it would be Mrs. plus her husband's last name, her husband's surname. So going back to Elizabeth Wakefield's mother, let's say her name is Alice, right? But her husband's surname is Wakefield. So she would be called Mrs. Wakefield. Okay, remember Wakefield would be her husband's last name. How do we know? Because we have Mrs. in front of it. Now, if we do not know her name, we can call her Miss or Ms again, or simply ma'am. Ma'am. So ma'am is very, very formal. I would say it's still used, ma'am, especially, if you go to a restaurant, at a hotel or something, and they'll say, may I help you, ma'am? Now, coming back to formal and informal settings. Now, when it comes to addressing them in a formal setting, we would use a title before their surname. So example of titles are, I've mentioned it before, we have Mr. Okay, Mr. You would never spell it M-I-S-T-E-R. You would always shorten it to just M-R, or a doctor or a professor. So doctor would be, you just spell it D-R. For professor, you can contract it, shorten it to just simply prof. And then we have Mrs., like I've taught you before, Ms. and Miss, all right? Now, in a less formal setting, we can call them by their first name. For example, among friends, among peers, etc., you can call them just by their name. Now, if you're the one who, you want to help them, you don't want them to call you by Miss or Doctor, you can just say, you know what, just call me Jane, just call me John. And that would be the norm. And I had a friend who recently received his doctorate, so he's a PhD holder now. His name, in front of his name, would be a doctor. So I said, so should I call you a doctor? And he said, oh, drop the title, because we're friends. We don't have to call each other. I don't have to call him doctor. He doesn't have to call me madam or puan. Okay, so, but then my tip is always to just start off formally, because you don't want to offend anyone, and then, wait for them to tell you to drop the title or keep the title. Okay, it's up to them. It's up to them. All right. Now, in terms of letters, in writing letters, you can have dear Mr. or dear Miss and then the last name. Okay. Or it could be, if you know him or her, it could be just simply dear John, dear Amy with a comma. Or if you don't know the person's name, you can call it to whom it may concern without a dear, to whom it may concern. So for this one, you would have to put the first letter in capital letters. So to whom it may concern, T, capital T, W, capital W, I, capital I, M, capital M, and then concern, C, capital C. Okay, so you make sure you do that, and then you would put a colon. So colon means 2 dots instead of a comma. This is formal, this is respectful. Or you could even, if you're like, for example, writing a letter to the recruitment team, you could put dear recruiter, okay, dear hiring manager, dear customer service team, or even to us if you're writing a letter to us, dear my English Matters team. Okay, that's where I work, my English Matters. Now, I've also seen dear sir or madam in a letter. This is actually considered, it's polite, but it's actually considered outdated. So it's old-fashioned to do this. So I would say that it is your job to find out the person's name. Who is the person in charge? Who are you writing to? Find out at least the department's name, if you're not sure, rather than write dear sir or madam. But again, it's still used, dear sir or madam. It's just that it can be considered old-fashioned. Okay. Now, let's talk about spelling and punctuation and grammar a little bit. So when it comes to using full stops or full stop That means a dot, right? Or a period in American form. Now, in American English, you would have Mr. MR with a full stop or a period, okay, or period, excuse me, right? So in America, using full stops is normal. So you'd have Mr. plus full stop, and that would be the American English version. For British English, you'd have Mr. MR without a full stop. So that's very interesting, but it's up to them. Sometimes they do use a full stop as well. So they have that option as well to do that. Okay, right. Let's talk about using commas and colons in letters. Now, this is different as well. British English, the greeting is always followed by a comma. So, for example, Dear Mary, comma, or Dear Mr. Potter, comma. But in American usage, it would be a comma in a personal letter. So, Dear Mary, you can see that Mary is used, her first name is used, comma. While in a business letter, it would be Dear Mr. full stop, Potter, colon, there. Yeah, you can see the difference there. In Malaysia, it really depends. I believe that we take the full stop and we take the comma as well. All right. So if you're not sure, you can always find out. Okay, always find out. You can do your research as well. Right. Now, in schools and universities in the UK, now in schools, you'd address your teachers like Ms. Webster or Miss Shad, M-I-S-S Shad, Mrs. Thompson if she's married, Mr. Barnes for a male teacher. And then this is interesting, at universities, once you're a bit older now, your lecturer wants to, keep a more friendly atmosphere. You can even call them by their first name. So look around, see what and how they're addressed. How would they like to be addressed? So it could be like John or Jennifer, right? But so it's formal to call them by their surname, like Dr. Watson, for example, Dr. Watson. And I have a friend whose name is Shafawati Ahmad Sani. She's a Malay, but she obtained her PhD in the UK. And they called her, initially they called her Dr. Ahmad Sani, but then she told them, no, just call me Shafa. So Dr. Ahmad Sani, so Dr. Ahmad Sani is very formal. It's very formal. And so it's up to you to set the tone. And I remember that for us Malaysians, we need to tell them as well because they don't know that it's actually our father's name. So even my mother was called Mrs. Shukri. Shukri is her husband's name, okay, my father's name. So that's something that you need to think about. How would you like to be called? How would you like to be addressed? Okay. Now, for Malaysians, we're a bit different. So we have Azimah Shurfa, Muhammad Shukri. And so Azimah Shurfa is my name, obviously. Muhammad Shukri is my father's name. And if you want to address me, because I'm married, I would like to be addressed as Madam Azimah, not Madam Shukri or Madam, my husband's surname or my husband's name. Okay. Now we do have different rules for Malaysian Chinese names. So Li Mei, Tan Li Mei. Li Mei would be her first name. And then Tan would be her family name, but in a formal setting, she would be called Miss Tan. And in an informal setting, she would be called Li Mei. Now, if she has a Western name, she would be called Emily Tan Li Mei. And if she's married, she will be called, she can be called Mrs. Chen if her husband's surname is Chen, or back to Miss Tan. So it's up to her.